The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the low hum of 100 different species communicating in their native tongues. Translators worked overtime as delegates from across the known galaxy gathered for what many considered the most important assembly in centuries. The recent discovery of a new hyperspace route had opened up an entire sector previously thought unreachable, and with it came the promise of untold riches and strategic advantages. Ambassador Marcus Chen sat quietly in the human delegation's modest section, his dark eyes scanning the massive amphitheater. The humans occupied barely a dozen seats in a chamber designed for thousands, a stark reminder of their relatively recent entry into galactic politics. Most species still viewed Earth as a backwater planet whose inhabitants had stumbled into space travel through sheer luck rather than skill. To his left, the Vorthon delegation occupied nearly a quarter of the chamber. Their crystalline forms caught and refracted the artificial sunlight streaming through the dome overhead, creating dazzling displays of color that seemed calculated to intimidate. The Vorthons had ruled vast swaths of space for over 10,000 years, their military might legendary throughout the galaxy. Their current speaker, High Command Zeth Kar, stood nearly 3 meters tall, his voice resonating like breaking glass when he addressed the assembly. The new sector rightfully belongs to those who have proven their worth through millennia of conquest and expansion, Zeth Kar declared, his crystalline face catching the light as he gestured dramatically. Primitive species who have barely learned to leave their birth worlds have no claim to such valuable territory. Several delegates nodded in agreement, particularly the reptilian Saurok Empire representatives. General Histok, his scarred hide telling stories of countless battles, rose from his seat with predatory grace. The Saurok Empire concurs with our Vorthon allies. This sector contains resources that require experienced hands to properly exploit. Species that still struggle with basic interstellar travel should concern themselves with their own star systems. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Aquarian Collective's representatives, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in what Marcus recognized as amusement, added their voices to the growing chorus. Perhaps the newer species should observe and learn from their betters before attempting to claim territory beyond their capabilities, gurgled Ambassador Tidalfin, her words carrying the condescending tone of someone addressing a particularly slow child. Marcus felt the familiar weight of dismissive stares settling on the human section. It was nothing new. In the 15 years since humanity had made first contact, they had been consistently underestimated, overlooked, and marginalized. Most galactic powers viewed humans as slightly more interesting than the typical pre-spaceflight civilization, notable only for their rapid technological advancement and unusual aggression. What they didn't know, what Marcus had spent years ensuring they never learned, was that humanity had been watching them far longer than anyone suspected. The human ambassador remained silent as the debate continued around him. Other minor species attempted to voice their opinions, only to be quickly shouted down or ignored entirely. The Centauri Federation's representative tried to suggest a joint colonization effort, but was dismissed with barely concealed laughter. The insectoid hive queens proposed a resource-sharing agreement that was met with such derision that several of them retreated into their shells in embarrassment. "What about the humans?" called out a voice from the upper tiers. Marcus looked up to see Ambassador Quilnara of the Ethereal Dominion, her translucent form shimmering with what might have been genuine curiosity. "Surely Earth's representatives have some opinion on this matter." The chamber fell silent, thousands of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs turning toward the small human delegation. Marcus could feel the weight of their collective attention, most of it tinged with amusement or mild curiosity. To them, he was a curiosity at best, a joke at worst. High Command Zeth Kar's crystalline features arranged themselves into what passed for a smile among his species. "Ah, yes, the humans. Please, Ambassador Chen, enlighten us with Earth's position on territorial expansion. Perhaps your species has developed some new insights during your brief tenure among the stars. The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. Several delegates chuckled, their various forms of laughter creating a discordant symphony that echoed through the chamber. Marcus noted how quickly the derision spread. Species that had been at each other's throats moments before now united in their amusement at humanity's expense. Marcus stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. At just under 2 meters tall, he was unremarkable by galactic standards. His dark hair was beginning to show traces of silver at the temples, and his face bore the kind of weathered look that spoke of years spent in difficult circumstances. To most observers, he appeared to be exactly what they expected from a human diplomat. Competent but unremarkable, trying hard to play in a league far beyond his species' abilities. "Earth appreciates the Council's interest in our perspective," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "However, we believe this matter requires careful consideration of all available information before any decisions are made." General Hisatak's forked tongue flicked out in what Marcus recognized as the Sauroch equivalent of an eye roll. "More human caution. Your species seems incapable of making decisions without endless deliberation. Perhaps that's because we prefer to understand what we're dealing with before we act," Marcus replied calmly. "And what exactly do you think you're dealing with, little human?" Zethkar's voice carried a sharp edge now. "This is not some primitive world where your kind can stumble about without consequences. This is galactic politics at its highest level." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right, High Command. This is indeed galactic politics at its highest level, which is why I find it curious that no one has mentioned the survey data from the new sector." A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. Ambassador Tidalfin's bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly. "What survey data? The sector was only discovered 3 standard cycles ago. No comprehensive surveys have been completed." "That's correct," Marcus agreed. "No comprehensive surveys have been completed by any of the major powers represented here today." The distinction in his phrasing was subtle, but several of the sharper delegates caught it immediately. The ethereal Dominion's representative leaned forward, her form brightening with interest. "Are you suggesting someone else has surveyed the sector?" Marcus clasped his hands behind his back. A gesture that appeared nervous to most observers, but was actually a signal to his aide, Lieutenant Sarah Reeves, who sat in the second row of the human section. Sarah's fingers moved almost imperceptibly across the data pad in her lap, initiating protocols that had been years in the making. "I'm not suggesting anything," Marcus said carefully. "I'm simply pointing out that assumptions about who has or hasn't been where can be dangerous in galactic politics." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices. Delegates demanded clarification, accused humans of deception, and generally created the kind of chaos that Marcus had been hoping to avoid. But it was too late now. The wheels were in motion. High Command Zethkar's crystalline form had taken on a reddish hue that Marcus knew indicated rising anger. "Enough of these word games, human. If you have information relevant to this discussion, present it. If not, stop wasting the Council's time with your species' typical evasiveness." Marcus looked around the chamber, noting the positions of the various delegates, the locations of the security personnel, and the subtle signs that told him Sarah had successfully activated their contingency plans. After years of careful preparation, the moment had finally arrived. "Very well," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new quality that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Since the Council insists on immediate action rather than careful deliberation, perhaps it's time you learned exactly what humanity has been doing during our brief tenure among the stars." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked innocuous enough to casual observers. Those with more experience in intelligence matters, however, recognized it immediately as a high-level data projector, the kind typically used for classified briefings. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications, Marcus continued, his earlier deference completely gone. Allow me to present the complete survey data for sector designation Theta 7, also known to your respective intelligence services as the New Territory. The device activated with a soft chime, and suddenly, the air above the chamber floor was filled with a three-dimensional holographic display showing star systems, planet classifications, resource distributions, and defensive positions in stunning detail. But what drew gasps from the assembled delegates wasn't the thoroughness of the survey. It was the timestamp, showing that the data had been collected over 18 months ago, and the discrete markers indicating the presence of monitoring stations, defensive platforms, and what appeared to be a significant military presence throughout the sector, all bearing the distinctive insignia of Earth's deep space operations. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could practically hear the mental gears grinding as thousands of the galaxy's finest political and military minds tried to process what they were seeing. The quiet human they had been mocking for years had just revealed that his species had been operating in the disputed territory for over a standard year, establishing a presence that none of their vaunted intelligence networks had detected. High Command Zethkar was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a crystalline shriek than his usual commanding tone. "This is impossible. Our deep space reconnaissance shows no signs of human presence in that sector." Marcus smiled, and for the first time, several delegates felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's climate control. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated for far too long and was finally ready to correct that misconception. "High Command," Marcus said quietly, "has it never occurred to any of you to wonder why a species that went from first flight to faster-than-light travel in less than 70 years might have developed some interesting capabilities along the way?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and suddenly the assembled delegates began to realize that perhaps they had been making some very dangerous assumptions about the quiet species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Ambassador Chen looked around the chamber one more time, noting the expressions of shock, confusion, and growing concern on faces across the political spectrum. After 15 years of careful planning and patient positioning, humanity was finally ready to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of, and Marcus Chen, the quiet human they had all dismissed as harmless, was just getting started. The holographic display continued to rotate slowly above the chamber floor, each detail becoming more damning as the assembled delegates studied the implications. What had initially appeared to be a simple territorial survey was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated and troubling. General Hisatak was the first to spot the tactical significance of the human positioning. His reptilian eyes, evolved for tracking prey across vast distances, picked out the subtle patterns that others had missed. "Those monitoring stations," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking nervously. "They're not randomly placed. This is a defensive network." Ambassador Tidalfin's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to deep purples and blues, colors that indicated serious concern among her species. "More than defensive. General, look at the overlapping coverage zones and the placement near the hyperspace transit points. This is a control network. Anyone trying to enter or leave that sector would have to pass through multiple observation points." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Very good, Ambassador Tidalfin. Your reputation for strategic thinking is well deserved." The compliment, delivered in the same quiet tone Marcus had used throughout the session, somehow carried more menace than any shouted threat. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as they began to understand that the human's earlier submissive behavior had been an act. High Command Zethkar's crystalline form was now glowing a deep red, the Vorthan equivalent of barely controlled rage. "This is an act of war. Secret military installations in unclaimed space violate 17 different galactic treaties." "Actually," Marcus replied mildly, It violates 0 galactic treaties because the space in question was never formally claimed by any recognized galactic power. Our legal department was quite thorough in their research before we began operations. Lieutenant Sarah Reeves stood from her position in the second row, her movement drawing attention throughout the chamber. Unlike her superior, she made no attempt to appear harmless. Her military bearing was evident in every line of her posture, and the various decorations on her uniform indicated extensive combat experience. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that came from leading troops in actual warfare rather than political maneuvering. "If I may clarify the legal situation," Sarah said, her words clipped and precise. "Under Section 12 of the Galactic Expansion Accords, any space not formally claimed within 50 standard years of discovery reverts to open territory status. Sector Theta 7 was first mapped by a Centauri exploration vessel 83 years ago. No formal claims were filed by any major power despite multiple opportunities to do so. The Centauri Federation's representative, an elderly humanoid whose species had been among the first to achieve interstellar travel, slowly nodded his agreement. "The human is correct. We discovered the sector but lacked the resources to establish a presence there. We assumed one of the major powers would eventually claim it. Which brings us to another interesting point," Marcus continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the growing tension in the chamber. "The assumption that Earth lacks the resources for major operations beyond our home system. I'm curious where that assumption originated." Silence greeted his question, but Marcus could see the answer in the uncomfortable glances being exchanged among the major power blocks. The assumption had originated from their own intelligence services, the same services that had apparently failed to detect humanity's activities in Sector Theta 7. Ambassador Quilnara of the Ethereal Dominion seemed to shimmer with nervous energy. "Ambassador Chen, surely you understand the concern that your revelations are causing. The galactic balance of power depends on transparency between major civilizations." "Does it?" Marcus asked. "Because from where I sit, the galactic balance of power seems to depend on the major civilizations maintaining overwhelming advantages over everyone else through superior technology, resources, and information. When was the last time a species like the Centauri or the Hive Queens was consulted on major galactic policy? When was the last time Earth's opinion mattered in any significant decision?" The questions hit their mark. Several delegates from minor species straightened in their seats, their attention now focused entirely on the human who was giving voice to concerns they had harbored for centuries. Marcus gestured to the holographic display. "For 15 years, humanity has been the new kid in the classroom, constantly reminded of our place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. We've been patient, respectful, and appropriately grateful for the wisdom of our betters, but patience and respect are not the same as weakness or incompetence." He touched a control on his data projector, and the display zoomed in on one of the monitoring stations. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing not just the station's external structure, but its internal systems, power generation capabilities, and defensive armaments. "This station," Marcus said calmly, "has been operational for 14 months. Its sensor array has a detection range of approximately 20 light-years and can identify and track up to 50,000 individual objects simultaneously. Its defensive systems are adequate for dealing with most conventional threats." General Histak leaned forward, his predatory instincts fully engaged now. "Define adequate, human." Marcus smiled again, and this time even the most obtuse delegates recognized the expression for what it was, the smile of a predator revealing its teeth. "Well, General, let me put it this way. 3 months ago, a Sarok reconnaissance fleet entered Sector Theta 7. The lead vessel was the heavy cruiser Bloodfang, if I'm not mistaken. Your ship, actually." The silence in the chamber was so complete that the normal background hum of the life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. General Histak's scaled features had gone completely motionless, the reptilian equivalent of a human's face going white with shock. The Bloodfang's mission was listed in your official logs as a routine patrol, Marcus continued conversationally. But the actual orders, transmitted on encrypted channels your intelligence service believed were secure, directed the fleet to conduct detailed surveys of the sector's defensive capabilities and resource distribution. Standard preparation for eventual military occupation. The Selrock general's jaw dropped open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. That information is classified at the highest levels of our military command. Yes, Marcus agreed. It was. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The humans hadn't just detected the Selrock reconnaissance mission, they had intercepted and decrypted the Empire's most secure military communications. Lieutenant Reeves stepped forward again, her expression as cold as deep space. General Histak, would you like to know what happened to your fleet during their visit to our sector? The reptilian general's tongue flicked out repeatedly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The mission was completed successfully. The fleet reported no contact with hostile forces. That's correct, Sarah confirmed. No contact was reported. But we were there, General. We watched your ships arrive, monitored your communications, tracked your sensor sweeps, and recorded your tactical assessments. We observed everything you did during your 18-day stay in our space. Your space? High Command Zethkar's voice had risen to a crystalline shriek. You're claiming ownership of an entire sector? Marcus held up a hand for silence, and remarkably, the chamber quieted immediately. The gesture was subtle, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. We're not claiming anything, High Command. We're simply stating facts. Humanity has maintained a continuous presence in Sector Theta-7 for over a year. We have extensive infrastructure throughout the region. We have detailed knowledge of every object larger than a communications satellite within a 50-light-year radius. Under any reasonable interpretation of galactic law, that constitutes effective control of the territory. Ambassador Tidalfin's bioluminescent patterns were now cycling through colors so rapidly that they created a strobing effect. This is madness! One species cannot simply claim an entire sector. The resource implications alone are considerable, Marcus finished. Sector Theta-7 contains 17 habitable worlds, 43 major asteroid mining sites, and 6 stable hyperspace junction points. The strategic and economic value is indeed substantial. He manipulated his data projector again, and the display shifted to show resource distribution throughout the sector. The wealth represented by the various mineral deposits, energy sources, and habitable real estate was staggering, easily equivalent to the total output of a dozen established star systems. But here's what I find truly interesting, Marcus continued. For the past 18 months, while we've been quietly establishing our presence in Theta-7, the major galactic powers have been engaged in increasingly aggressive posturing throughout the known galaxy. Border disputes, trade wars, military buildups, all supposedly due to resource scarcity and the need for expansion. He gestured around the chamber. Yet when a solution presents itself, a massive unclaimed sector with enough resources to satisfy everyone's expansion needs for the next century, suddenly the discussion becomes about who deserves what, based on their historical power rather than their actual capabilities or needs. The accusation was clear, and several delegates had the grace to look uncomfortable. The major powers had indeed been using resource scarcity as justification for increasingly aggressive policies, while apparently ignoring the existence of abundant unclaimed territory. Which brings me to my main point, Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. For 15 years, humanity has been dismissed, marginalized, and condescended to by species who assumed we were too primitive to matter in galactic affairs. We were told to be grateful for the scraps from the major powers table, to learn our place, and to wait patiently for the day when we might be considered worthy of basic respect. The holographic display shifted again, now showing the full scope of human operations throughout Sector Theta 7. Monitoring stations, mining operations, defensive platforms, and what appeared to be several major installations that could only be described as military bases. But we weren't waiting, Marcus said quietly. We were working. While you were all focused on your traditional rivalries and ancient grudges, we were out there in the dark, doing what humans do best, adapting, learning, and preparing for the future. Lieutenant Reeves activated her own data projector, and suddenly the chamber was filled with additional displays showing technical specifications, resource extraction rates, and defensive capabilities that made several military attachés reach for their emergency communication devices. The monitoring stations you've been analyzing represent approximately 8% of our total infrastructure in the sector, she announced calmly. The remaining installations include shipyards, research facilities, manufacturing plants, and defensive systems that would make any of your homeworld's protection networks look inadequate by comparison. The bombshell hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. What they had thought was an impressive but limited human presence was actually just the tip of an enormous iceberg. General Hisatak found his voice first, though it came out as more of a croak than his usual commanding tone. Impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected construction on that scale. Sarah Reeves smiled, and it was perhaps even more unsettling than her superior's expression had been. General, your intelligence networks couldn't detect a single monitoring station, let alone a full-scale colonization and development program. What makes you think they would be any more effective at finding our major installations? The question highlighted a fundamental problem that was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. If the Galactic Powers intelligence services had failed so completely to detect human activities in Sector Theta 7, what else might they have missed? Marcus looked around the chamber one final time, noting the expressions of shock, fear, and growing respect on faces throughout the assembly. The quiet human they had all dismissed was revealing himself to be something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. And he still wasn't finished. The atmosphere in the Galactic Council chamber had shifted dramatically from casual dismissal to tense anticipation. Delegates who had been lounging comfortably in their seats now sat forward, their full attention focused on the human ambassador who had just revealed the scope of his species' hidden activities. Marcus Chen studied the faces around him, noting the different reactions with the careful attention of someone who had spent years learning to read alien expressions. The major powers showed varying degrees of shock and anger, while the representatives of minor species displayed something that looked remarkably like hope. The political dynamics of the galaxy were shifting in real time, and everyone knew it. I believe, Marcus said quietly, that we may have reached the point where certain misunderstandings need to be addressed directly. He activated his communicator with a gesture that seemed casual, but was actually a carefully rehearsed signal. Within moments, the chamber's main communication array activated, displaying an incoming transmission from an unknown source. Ambassador Chen, came a crisp voice, speaking perfect galactic standard. This is Admiral Sarah Mitchell aboard the UES Prometheus. We are standing by for your orders. The title and ship designation sent ripples of confusion through the chamber. The Universal Earthship naming convention was familiar enough, but the concept of humanity fielding an admiral, let alone a fleet large enough to require one, challenged everything the Galactic Powers thought they knew about Earth's military capabilities. High Command Zethkar's crystalline form flared with angry red light. This is a setup. Some pathetic human attempt to project power they don't possess. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the Vorthan commander's accusation. Admiral Mitchell, could you please confirm your current position for the Council? Certainly, Ambassador. We are currently holding position at coordinates Theta 7 Alpha, approximately 15 light-years from the Council chambers. Fleet composition consists of 47 vessels, including 3 Dreadnought-class battleships, 12 heavy cruisers, 18 destroyers, and 14 support vessels. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several delegates activating their personal communication devices, desperately trying to contact their home governments and military commands. A human fleet of that size shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist without someone noticing its construction. General Hisatak was frantically manipulating his own communicator, his scales shifting to the modeled pattern that indicated extreme stress among his species. Impossible! Our deep space monitoring stations show no fleet movements in that region. General, Admiral Mitchell's voice carried a note of professional courtesy that somehow made her words more cutting than any insult could have been. Your monitoring stations have been feeding you carefully edited information for the past 8 months. We've found it useful to let you see exactly what we want you to see. Lieutenant Reeves stepped forward again, her data projector now displaying technical specifications that made several military delegates reach for their emergency protocols. The jamming and deception technology we've developed is quite sophisticated. It works by analyzing your sensor frequencies and feeding false data directly into your detection networks. From your perspective, space appears completely normal. The implications hit the chamber like a series of hammer blows. If humanity could manipulate the major powers' sensor networks at will, then everything they thought they knew about galactic security was wrong. Ambassador Quill Nara of the Ethereal Dominion seemed to be flickering more rapidly than usual, a sign of severe agitation among her energy-based species. Ambassador Chen, surely you understand that what you're describing constitutes acts of war against multiple sovereign governments. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting perspective, Ambassador. Let me ask you a question in return. When the Vorthon Empire conducts secret reconnaissance missions in neutral space, do they consider that an act of war? When the Saurok military intercepts and monitors civilian communications from minor species, is that aggression? When the Aquarian Collective manipulates trade agreements to force smaller civilizations into economic dependency, does that qualify as hostile action? The questions struck home with surgical precision. Each accusation was specific enough to be verifiable, general enough to encompass years of standard practice by the major powers, and devastating enough to expose the hypocrisy underlying their outrage. What we've done, Marcus continued, is exactly what every major power in this chamber does on a regular basis. We've gathered intelligence, protected our interests, and prepared for the possibility that diplomatic solutions might not be sufficient. The only difference is that we've been more effective at it than anyone expected. High Command. Zethkar rose to his full, imposing height, his crystalline features arranged in a configuration that most species recognized as threatening. Enough of these games, human. You will cease your illegal activities immediately and withdraw from Sector Theta 7, or face the consequences of challenging established galactic powers. The threat hung in the air for a moment before Marcus responded with a quiet chuckle that somehow conveyed more menace than any shouted challenge could have. High Command, Marcus said gently, I believe there may be a fundamental misunderstanding here about who is in a position to make threats. He activated his communicator again. Admiral Mitchell, could you please provide the Council with a status report on current galactic fleet movements? Of course, Ambassador. Our monitoring networks show the following major fleet deployments. The Vorthon 3rd Battle Group is currently conducting exercises near the Rigel system, approximately 40 light-years from their home worlds. The Saurok Imperial Navy's primary fleet is engaged in what they've designated as patrol operations along their border with the Centauri Federation. The Aquarian Collective's defense fleet is investigating reports of piracy in the Outer Rim territories. Admiral Mitchell paused, and when she continued, her tone had taken on a distinctly predatory quality. All of these fleets are currently operating at distances that would require between 18 and 36 hours to return to their respective home systems, assuming they could disengage from their current operations immediately. The mathematical implications were clear to every military mind in the chamber. The major powers had their fleets scattered across the galaxy, engaged in operations that would prevent rapid response to any emergency. Meanwhile, humanity had concentrated a significant battle group within striking distance of the galaxy's political center. General Histak's tongue was now flicking constantly, his reptilian equivalent of hyperventilation. "You're describing a coup, an attempt to seize control of the galactic government." Marcus shook his head sadly. "General, you're still thinking in terms of the old paradigms. This isn't about seizing control of anything. It's about ensuring that humanity's interests are respected and our voice is heard in galactic affairs." Lieutenant Reeves activated another display, this one showing detailed intelligence files on each of the major powers' military capabilities, economic weaknesses, and political vulnerabilities. The level of detail was extraordinary, encompassing everything from fleet compositions to the personal habits of key political figures. "For the past 15 years, Sarah explained, humanity has been systematically gathering information about every major civilization in the galaxy. We know your military doctrines, your economic dependencies, your political fault lines, and your cultural blind spots. We've studied you with the same intensity that a hunter studies dangerous prey." The comparison was deliberate and unsettling. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as they realized that the humans hadn't been trying to emulate or join the galactic community so much as they had been analyzing it for weaknesses. Ambassador Tidalfin's bioluminescent patterns had settled into a steady dark blue that indicated deep concern among her species. "What exactly do you want, Ambassador Chen?" Marcus smiled, and this time there was nothing predatory about it. Instead, it was the expression of someone who had finally reached the point where they could stop pretending and speak honestly. "What we want, Ambassador, is very simple. We want to be treated as equals rather than curiosities. We want our opinions to carry the same weight as those of species who happened to develop space travel a few thousand years before we did. We want fair access to galactic markets, technologies, and territories based on our capabilities rather than our age as a spacefaring civilization." He gestured around the chamber. "For too long, galactic politics has been dominated by a handful of ancient powers who divide up the galaxy among themselves while paying lip service to the rights of smaller civilizations. The minor species are kept in their place through a combination of technological dependency, economic manipulation, and the implicit threat of military action if they step out of line." The accusations were sweeping and damning, but they were also accurate enough that none of the major power representatives could effectively deny them. "Humanity is offering an alternative," Marcus continued. "A galaxy where technological innovation and actual capability matter more than historical precedent, where smaller civilizations have real voices in their own governance rather than being treated as vassals of the major powers." Admiral Mitchell's voice came through the communicator again, adding weight to her ambassador's words. "To demonstrate our commitment to this principle, we are prepared to share certain technologies with any civilization that commits to supporting genuine galactic reform. Our sensor and stealth capabilities, for example, could level the intelligence-gathering playing field considerably." The offer sent shockwaves through the chamber. The minor species representatives were suddenly sitting straighter, their expressions showing the kind of hope that had been absent from galactic politics for centuries. The major power delegates, meanwhile, looked as though they had just watched their fundamental advantages being offered to their potential opponents. High Command Zethkar's crystalline form was now pulsing with rapid color changes, indicating barely controlled rage. "This is blackmail! Economic manipulation! You're attempting to destabilize the established galactic order." Marcus nodded calmly. "Yes, we are. The established galactic order has served the interests of a few powerful civilizations while keeping everyone else in positions of dependency and subservience. We believe it's time for that to change." He looked directly at the Vorthon commander, his expression completely serious now. "High Command, you've spent the last hour demonstrating exactly why the current system needs to change. Your first reaction to discovering that a lesser species had developed capabilities you didn't expect was to demand that we abandon our achievements and submit to your authority. Not once did you consider that perhaps humanity had earned the right to be treated as an equal." The truth of the statement was undeniable, and even some of Zethkar's own allies looked uncomfortable with how accurately the human had characterized their initial response. "The question now," Marcus continued, "is whether the major powers are willing to adapt to a new reality, or whether they're going to insist on maintaining a system that no longer reflects the actual balance of power in the galaxy." As if summoned by his words, Admiral Mitchell's voice filled the chamber once more. "Ambassador, I should probably mention that we've just received confirmation from our monitoring stations. 3 additional human battle groups have taken positions near the home systems of the Vorthon Empire, the Saurok Republic, and the Aquarian Collective. Not threatening positions, you understand, but close enough to respond quickly if any hostile actions are taken against Earth or our allies." The final piece of Marcus's strategy clicked into place. Humanity hadn't just revealed their presence in Sector Theta 7. They had demonstrated that they could project military power throughout the galaxy, while the major powers' own fleets were scattered and unprepared. The quiet human they had all underestimated had just checkmated the entire galactic establishment. And from the expressions on faces throughout the chamber, everyone was beginning to realize that the galaxy would never be the same again. The Galactic Council chamber had become a pressure cooker of tension and barely controlled panic. Emergency communications were being sent to home governments across the galaxy as the full implications of humanity's revelations continued to sink in. The established order that had maintained galactic stability for millennia was crumbling in real time, and everyone knew it. Marcus Chen stood at the center of it all, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. He had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, and now that it had arrived, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The species that had dismissed humanity as harmless primitives were finally beginning to understand what they were actually dealing with. High Command Zethkar had recovered some of his composure, though his crystalline form still flickered with angry reds and threatening purples. "Even assuming your claims are accurate, human, you've made a fatal miscalculation. The major powers of this galaxy didn't achieve their positions through accident. We have resources and capabilities you cannot imagine." "Such as?" Marcus asked mildly. "The Vorthon Empire alone commands over 14,000 star systems," Zethkar declared. "Our military-industrial complex can produce more warships in a single year than your entire species could crew. Our technological advantages span millennia of development." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive numbers, High Command. Tell me, how many of those 14,000 systems are actually capable of independent production versus resource extraction and refinement?" The question caught the Vorthon off guard. Zethkar's color patterns shifted slightly, indicating uncertainty. "Our industrial distribution is classified information." "Actually, it's not," Lieutenant Reeves interjected, activating another display. "According to our analysis, the Vorthon Empire's actual manufacturing capacity is concentrated in approximately 400 core systems, with the remainder serving primarily as resource providers and population centers. The same pattern holds true for the other major powers." The display showed detailed breakdowns of each empire's industrial capabilities, supply lines, and strategic vulnerabilities. The level of intelligence gathering represented was staggering, encompassing information that most governments didn't even have about their own territories. General Hisatak leaned forward, his predatory instincts fully engaged despite his obvious discomfort with the situation. How did you acquire this level of detailed intelligence without detection? Marcus exchanged a look with Sarah Reeves before responding. General, I think it's time we discussed exactly what humanity has been doing for the past 15 years. He activated his data projector one final time, and the chamber filled with a holographic display showing the galaxy itself, but not as the assembled delegates had ever seen it before. Tiny markers scattered throughout known space indicated monitoring stations, intelligence-gathering posts, and what could only be described as sleeper assets embedded within the major civilizations themselves. When humanity first made contact with galactic civilization, Marcus began, we faced a fundamental problem. We were newcomers to a game that had been going on for thousands of years, with established players who had no intention of sharing power or influence with upstart primitives from an obscure star system. The display zoomed in on specific regions, showing the extent of human intelligence networks throughout the galaxy. The scope was breathtaking, encompassing not just the major powers but dozens of minor civilizations, trade routes, and strategic locations. So we did what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We adapted, we learned, and we prepared. Admiral Mitchell's voice came through the communicator with a new note of professional pride. The Human Intelligence Directorate has been operating for 12 years, Ambassador. During that time, we've established monitoring capabilities in every major star system, recruited information sources within every significant government, and developed the technological capabilities necessary to level the playing field with civilizations that had thousand-year head starts. Ambassador Quill Nara's ethereal form was flickering rapidly, indicating severe distress among her energy-based species. You're describing the largest intelligence operation in galactic history. The resources required alone were considerable, Marcus agreed, but not impossible for a species that could go from first flight to faster-than-light travel in 70 years. You see that rapid technological development that everyone found so amusing? It didn't stop just because we made contact with the galactic community. Lieutenant Reeves smiled coldly. While the major powers were focused on their traditional rivalries and assumed human technology would develop along predictable lines, we were actually accelerating our development in areas specifically designed to counter your advantages. A new display activated, showing comparative technological development over the past 15 years. The major powers had continued their steady, incremental advancement in traditional areas like weapons and propulsion. Meanwhile, humanity had made quantum leaps in intelligence gathering, stealth technology, and what could only be described as asymmetric warfare capabilities. You all assumed that because we were new to the galactic community, we would naturally follow established patterns, Marcus explained. You expected us to try to match your conventional military capabilities, compete in your traditional markets, and gradually work our way up through the existing hierarchy. His expression hardened. But we're not Centauri or Hive Queens, content to accept whatever scraps the major powers choose to throw our way. We're humans. When faced with a system designed to keep us down, we don't try to work within it. We change it. The truth of that statement was becoming undeniably clear as more details of humanity's operations were revealed. They hadn't tried to build bigger fleets or conquer more territory in the traditional sense. Instead, they had systematically undermined the intelligence capabilities that allowed the major powers to maintain their dominance, while simultaneously building the kind of asymmetric advantages that could neutralize conventional military superiority. General Histok was studying the intelligence displays with the focused attention of a career military officer. Even granting your intelligence advantages and technological surprises, you're still talking about 300 billion humans against trillions of sentients across dozens of major civilizations. The math doesn't work in your favor. Marcus smiled, and several delegates felt their blood run cold at the expression. General, you're still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. What makes you think we would fight fair? The question hung in the air ominously before Admiral Mitchell's voice provided clarification. General Hisatak, your home fleet is currently conducting exercises in the Altair system. The fleet's communication array is managed by a series of quantum processors manufactured by Centauri Industries. Those processors contain certain modifications that we installed during the manufacturing process 18 months ago. The Sauroch general's jaw dropped open, revealing his razor-sharp teeth. You're saying you've compromised our fleet communications? Not just your fleet, General. Every major military and civilian communication system in the galaxy relies on components that have passed through our networks at some point during their manufacturing or maintenance cycles. Quantum processors, sensor arrays, navigation computers, weapons control systems. They're all connected to a galactic supply chain that we've been quietly influencing for years. The implications were staggering. If humanity had compromised the basic technological infrastructure that the galaxy depended on, then conventional military responses might not even be possible. High Command Zethkar's crystalline form was now cycling rapidly through colors that indicated panic among his species. This is impossible! The level of coordination required, the security measures that would need to be bypassed, would indeed be impressive, Marcus agreed, if we had been working alone. He gestured toward the section of the chamber where the minor species representatives sat. Many of them were now sitting forward, their expressions showing a mixture of hope and barely concealed excitement. You see, High Command, one of the advantages of being dismissed and marginalized is that nobody pays attention to who you're talking to. For the past 12 years, humanity has been quietly building relationships with every species that the major powers consider beneath notice. Ambassador Veltar of the Insectoid Collective stood slowly, her 4 arms spread in a gesture of formal recognition. The Hive Queens pledged their support to the human proposal for galactic reform. The current system has kept our people in technological and economic bondage for too long. More representatives began standing throughout the minor species section. The Centauri Federation delegate, several of the Rim-World ambassadors, even representatives from species that most major powers couldn't identify without consulting their databases. What you're witnessing, Marcus explained to the stunned major power delegates, is the formation of a new political alliance. One based not on historical dominance, but on mutual respect and shared opposition to the current system. Admiral Mitchell's voice carried a note of satisfaction as she added, Combined fleet strength of the Allied reform movement currently stands at just over 800 vessels, with manufacturing capabilities distributed across 47 star systems. Not enough to match the major powers in conventional warfare, but more than sufficient for our actual strategic requirements. The numbers were shocking, not because they represented overwhelming force, but because they represented something that shouldn't exist. A unified military coalition of species that had previously been too weak and scattered to challenge the established order. General Hisatak was frantically working his communicator, trying to contact his government's strategic planning division. This is madness! You're talking about civil war on a galactic scale. No, General, Marcus replied quietly. We're talking about evolution. The galactic political system has been stagnant for millennia, maintained through force and intimidation, rather than actual effectiveness or legitimacy. It was inevitable that eventually someone would develop the capabilities necessary to challenge it. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from across the political spectrum. The question is whether that challenge leads to destructive conflict or constructive change. Ambassador Tidalfin's bioluminescent patterns had settled into a steady purple, indicating deep thought among her species. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Chen?" Marcus clasped his hands behind his back, the gesture now carrying authority rather than nervousness. "We're proposing a new galactic charter, one that gives actual representation to all spacefaring civilizations based on their current capabilities rather than their historical position. Real voting power for species that have been treated as vassals. Genuine economic opportunities for civilizations that have been locked out of profitable markets." Lieutenant Reeves activated a final display showing the proposed new governmental structure. It was radically different from the existing council system, with built-in protections for minority species and mechanisms for peaceful power transitions. "We're also proposing technology-sharing agreements that would allow smaller civilizations to achieve genuine independence," Sarah added. "No more forced dependency on major power infrastructure. No more economic arrangements that amount to barely disguised slavery." High Command Zethkar had recovered enough composure to mount a final argument. "Even if we accepted such proposals, which we never would, you lack the enforcement mechanisms to implement them. The major powers will never voluntarily surrender their advantages." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're probably right, High Command, which is why we've prepared alternative approaches." Admiral Mitchell's voice filled the chamber one last time, and her tone left no room for misinterpretation. "All major power home systems are currently under surveillance by human stealth vessels. We have detailed targeting information for critical infrastructure, government centers, and military installations. Additionally, our infiltration of galactic communication and computer networks gives us the capability to disrupt your coordination and command structures at will." She paused to let the implications sink in before continuing. "We're not interested in conquest or destruction, but we are absolutely committed to ending the current system of galactic governance. The major powers can choose to be part of that change, or they can choose to be obstacles to it." The threat was clear, comprehensive, and apparently backed by capabilities that none of the major powers had suspected existed. The quiet human they had all dismissed as harmless had just demonstrated that humanity possessed both the intelligence networks and the military capabilities necessary to bring down the entire established galactic order. Marcus Chen looked around the chamber one final time, noting the expressions of shock, fear, and grudging respect on faces throughout the assembly. After 15 years of careful planning and patient execution, humanity had achieved the impossible. They had forced the galaxy's most powerful civilizations to take them seriously. "The choice is yours," Marcus said quietly. "You can work with us to build a better, more equitable galactic civilization, or you can try to maintain the old system and deal with the consequences when it inevitably collapses." He smiled, and for the first time in the entire session, it was a genuinely warm expression. "But I should probably mention that we humans have a saying, 'Don't mistake our patience for weakness.' We've been patient for 15 years. Now we're ready to see some results." The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. The galaxy stood at a crossroads, and everyone in the chamber knew that the decisions made in the next few hours would determine the course of galactic civilization for centuries to come. The quiet human had spoken, and the galaxy would never be the same again.